All right, hello. So, welcome to my presentation. First, let me start by introducing myself. My name is Brandon Lara. I am currently enrolled as a business student at the Western New Mexico University. I'm currently studying to get my undergrad in general business with a minor in digital forensics. And so today I'm going to be doing my presentation on mobile device forensics with general knowledge for startups. So let's go ahead and get into it. So, mobile devices are becoming more popular in various forms of illegal and unethical misconduct, which has developed a rapidly growing market. So, this report is designed to educate about the various types of mobile devices that are in use today and their influence in digital forensics. The influence cybercrime has on global economies and the growing market for protection against hackers will be discussed. Following will be multiple analysis of various methods of acquisitions formulated for mobile devices specifically. Finally, this report will inform basics required to start a business within the industry, as well as the requisites pertaining to the state of Minnesota as a sample reference, which I currently live in the state of Minnesota. So this information is definitely helpful for me. All right, so mobile devices. Whenever you hear mobile devices, most everybody immediately thinks mobile phones. However, there's actually a wide array of various mobile devices that are in use today. So there are, of course, mobile phones, and the most popular are the iPhone, Samsung Galaxy, and there are Windows phones. There's also LGs. And then next, of course, are tablet computers such as iPads, Samsung Galaxies, the Microsoft Surface Pro, and then laptops, media players such as iPods. Sony has a media player, so does SanDisk. There are also e-readers, for example, the Amazon Kindle, as well as Barnes and Noble, and everybody uses those essentially for just reading books and other types of literature. And then there's also wearable devices such as the Apple Watch, Fitbit, and Samsung also has the Galaxy Watch. Another mobile device, they're called PDTs or EDAs, and they are wireless portable data terminals. And these are used specifically by places like UPS, USPS, and FedEx. So they're dyads. And from my experience, when I used to work at UPS, the technology of the UPS dyad is so precise that it knows where the driver is at all times. It knows how fast he's driving, how fast he's walking. They know if you're doing like a brisk walk. They know if you're running. They know almost down to within, I believe it was a foot of the actual location. So they know if you don't go all the way up to the door. It's crazy. Also, there are handheld gaming devices such as the Nintendo Switch and the Sony PS Vita. And then digital cameras. So Sony has some, Canon has some, and Nikon has some. I also want to include dash cams and other wearable recording devices such as like the GoPro headset. So a lot of pro sports athletes will be wearing them, for example, while biking or snowboarding for various sports. And then there's also GPS navigation, so TomTom, Garmin, and Primax. For me personally, I haven't used one of those in a long time. I essentially rely on my cell phone's GPS, and I think most people do as well. Okay, so I just want to throw some statistics out there about the mobile device penetration. So there's about 7 out of every 10% of the 20% poorest households in developing countries who have access to mobile phones but not access to toilets or clean water, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's crazy. That's 70% of the bottom fifth of those developing countries who essentially own cell phones. It's kind of makes you question their priorities if they have access to mobile phones versus the other basic necessities. It's like they're essentially living primitive lives, but with access to technology anyway, that doesn't really help them. Whenever I think of that, I think of, for example, those caveman commercials, and the man is trying to crack open a rock with a wooden club, and his wife walks out to give him the cell phone because he had a call come in. But anyway, so in the U.S., about 82.5% own mobile phones in 2019, and that is a huge number of people owning mobile phones. So between 2015 and 2018, you can see here on the graph the graph that the amount of data breaches in 2015 was about 781 million. And then 2016 is just over 1 billion data breaches. And if you look down with the exposed amount of records, so for 2018 there was over 446.5 billion records exposed. And that's 1.2 billion data breaches. I mean, that is scary, and that's in the U.S. alone. So if that many data breaches are occurring, then it definitely brings attention and awareness to the fact that cyber crimes are becoming more common, and they're more dangerous than ever, really. So the Minnesota cybercrime, I just wanted to include some of these figures for that. So 50% of small and medium businesses, or the SMBs, reported being breached in 2012. So 50% in the state of Minnesota were breached in 2012. And what's crazy is that this isn't a very large state, but most of course, the population is going to be within the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, who happens to have 19 Fortune 500 companies headquartered here. 19 in such a small area. I can't believe it. Blows my mind every time I think of it, and every time I say it. I cannot believe it. But the amount of businesses who are being breached, and their information is obviously being stolen and held for ransom. I mean, it's scary, the amount of information that people are able to obtain. And then most attacks come from web-based phishing and social engineering. And I put down there that there's approximately 489,000 businesses in the state of Minnesota in 2012. And of course, like I said, most of them are probably going to be located within the largest metro in the state. So there are economic impacts for 2017. So based on the North American region GDP, it was measured at $20.2 trillion. GDP loss due to cyber crime was between $140 and $175 billion. I guess I forgot to include, oh, there it is. $175 billion in loss just from cyber crimes. It's, just a fraction of that. 10% of that could definitely help prevent problems like this happening within markets. So, it's definitely a serious thing that's going on. So there are multiple types of acquisition tools for mobile devices. So if we look to the left, of course, there's different types of equipment: desktops, laptops, included write blockers, and there's other task-specific tools. Which, if you look over here to the right, I have a pyramid of 5 classifications. The base being, the most preferred usage, all the way up to the most intricate. Which I'll get into those in a little bit. But there are also different types of, outside of equipment, there's different softwares that are used uh, to help acquire certain data from specific devices. So, for example, all the ones that I have listed over here are for mobile devices exclusively. Well, not exclusive. Like, for example, the Oxygen Forensic Suite. They have a lot of different software for not just mobile devices, but for regular Windows PCs and so forth. So first, we'll get into the physical acquisition method, which is also known as a manual acquisition. And as I showed you on that pyramid, this is located at the bottom of the pyramid. So the concept of the physical acquisition is that it copies the entire drive, including deleted data, data fragments, and unstructured data. And these acquisitions do not always require disassembling the devices. Sometimes they do, just dependent on on the condition of the devices. Instead, this requires the devices to be connected to workstations via a device-specific cord. In the same section of the pyramid are what's called live acquisitions. And live acquisitions are conducted on the suspect device while it's powered on. Now, of course, most people would prefer to do it while the devices are off, but there are special instances where they have to perform while the device is on. It definitely does create a little bit more of a riskier situation whenever the devices are on, because especially if the device is accidentally left connected to the internet, because then somebody else who may have access to the information, may have access to the network remotely, could, in theory, get into it and corrupt any evidence or any suspect evidence. So next is the logical acquisition. And these do not copy the entire drives, but instead they extract data found in specific files that are deemed related to the investigation. So Spark acquisitions are very commonly used as well. So they're similar to the logical acquisitions, that in the aspect that they don't copy the entire drives, but they do collect fragments of the unallocated data. However, these are typically used whenever the entire drive is to be examined. So, from the physical acquisition, if they're not able to acquire all of the information, some of these fragments can be used to rebuild corrupt or lost or nearly lost data. Also, backup acquisitions. And these are done what's called over the air. And it's essentially just accessing the backup data from a cloud source. So you don't actually have to have the device on hand to acquire this information. So the next classification on the pyramid is J-tagging and hex dumping. So J-tagging is a much more advanced acquisition method, and it does require more experienced examiners to conduct the process, because they have to disassemble the device, and it definitely becomes a riskier situation, and it is more destructive, of course. And they have to use JTAG specific tools that they connect directly to ports on the circuit board in order to access some of this data. And it is raw data that they have to then convert later. And then hex dumping as well uses the static acquisition, which involves either connecting cables to the chips and using specific software to extract the raw data, or by completely removing the chips from the circuit board and extracting the total file system. So next up that classification pyramid is going to be what's called chip off. So this is very labor intensive, and these are typically done after all the others have been exhausted and attempted. This is definitely more destructive, since it requires desoldering the flash memory chip and attaching wire leads to the PCB contacts. It definitely requires a very high knowledge examiner in order to conduct this procedure. These acquisition results are similar to the data extracted from JTagging. However, like I said, it has to be conducted by a very advanced professional. Otherwise, you risk absolutely destroying and losing everything. Which, in digital forensics, maintaining the integrity of evidence is key. It definitely is key. That's the case. And then the final classification on the pyramid is called microread. So this is the most intricate process of them all. It usually is performed, of course, by expert forensic teams in matters related to national security, and they're usually not conducted by lower agencies of law enforcement. So this is something that is rarely done. It's only done under specific situations, and this is used whenever the devices are, for the most part, damaged, broken, inaccessible. And after everything else has already been exhausted, that's when these processes are conducted. They're very expensive, very labor intensive, and very destructive. So it definitely is not for a novice examiner. And if you look down here is a figure of the process. So it's a 4-step process, starting with the chemical process to remove the top layer of the chip, followed by using a high-powered microscope that reads the gates. And then it translates binary data to hex, and then from hex to readable data. So it's a very intricate process, very time-consuming, and is definitely something that's not for everybody. In smaller labs, they'll never even use something like this. So starting a business requires licenses and accreditations, especially in this business. And for one thing, every business, in order to be successful, requires an efficient, thorough business plan. And then, of course, when it comes to building a lab, you have to have specific lab plans and lab design. So you definitely have to map this all out before you decide to get into it. Well, for yourself. So licensing requires for the state of Minnesota. So all of these that I'm going to reference are going to be all specific to the state of Minnesota, just as a reference point. I would like to note that every state is different. Every state has different accreditations and different licensing requirements. So definitely consult with the local board for the state that you're in. Go ahead and moving on. So certifications. So these are certifications that are definitely good for somebody who is trying to start out their career. Not necessarily somebody who's trying to start their own business, but these are just some great certifications that will help anybody who's getting into the industry as a forensics investigator. These certifications will help you be more qualifiable in order to land that job that's going to teach you everything that you need to learn to prepare you for starting your own business. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but I'll go ahead and name them off. So the first one is a Cisco Certified Network Assistant, CCNA. And then there's the CompTIA A+ certification. And then there's a Certified Information Systems Security Professional, CISSP, the Network Plus, and finally the Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert. So there are just a multitude of certifications that you can acquire that will always benefit you in your career from beginning to the end. And honestly, when it comes to digital forensics, it's comparable to a medical doctor. You have to continuously educate yourself to ensure that you are getting the most information up to date. That way you can conduct your investigations with the highest level of accuracy. especially when it comes to legal cases. You have to make sure that all of your evidence is absolutely, all of your conclusions are 100% on point and precise to ensure that your expert eyewitness opinion is not downgraded and is not diminished. So the Minnesota State basic requirements just for getting the license. So I'll go ahead and go through them. So each applicant must be 18 years of age. Each applicant must not have a record of felony convictions nor record of convictions of offenses as identified under these Minnesota statutes. Applying parties must provide a $10,000 surety bond at the time of application. You also have to provide acceptable proof of financial responsibility documentation under the specific Minnesota state statutes. The completion of required application materials and documents, of course, all have to be submitted at the same time. Each applicant must be of good character, honesty, and integrity. It's very important. You're dealing with a lot of sensitive information. You're dealing with people's lives in this matter. And then also the proof of mandatory employment experience. And like I said, every state is going to have something different, so definitely consult with the local state regulations. So for the state of Minnesota, applicants must complete 6,000 hours of documented investigative employment history. So I'm not going to go through both of these columns here that I have. So one side is for private detectives, the other side is for a private agent. So these are two different types of licenses. And they're essentially, for the most part, worded similarly. I'll go ahead and run through the private detective. So as an investigator, you have to have worked with an investigator who is licensed in a private detective investigative agency, or you have to have worked as an investigator with the U.S. government, or you have to have worked with the local law enforcement, such as a police department or a sheriff's office, or you have been employed in an investigative profession that the board may find as an equivalent in scope, responsibility, and training as one of the specific positions as listed above. And it's essentially the same thing, slightly different wording for the private agent. So this is when it comes to the business plan. So this is an important aspect. So the business plan has a lot of various important components. I'm not going to get into every single one of them, but I have listed critical aspects of the business plan. So every company has to have a mission and a vision statement, and these articulate the goals and directives to be attained. And in all reality, whenever you go to a company's website or a business website, you go to the About Us and you see what they have there for their vision and their mission statement, because in a lot of cases their values will align with yours. So something like that will also help you to decide which direction you want to go with for your vendors. And that's from a consumer standpoint. The business plan also should have a thorough description of the business or service. In this case, it would be mobile device forensics. The business plan should have an established target market, and I went over a lot of those cybercrime aspects earlier of how many people and who's being affected by it. Businesses, of course. And then later I'm going to go over some of the other targeted markets. And then, of course, a marketing plan. So I wanted to emphasize on the marketing plan because anybody can sell a good or a service and have the worst marketing plan and not do the best in sales. So when it comes to growing your company, it's done through sales. Sales and marketing are like the husband and wife in a business. These are the things that are going to drive your business. If you have a poor marketing plan and you're not marketing correctly to your audience, you are going to see that. It's going to reflect in your sales. And if you're not selling, you're not producing, you're not growing. You cannot develop your company with a poor marketing plan. Now, granted, I get a lot of people have been able to get away with word of mouth, but word of mouth goes only so far. So definitely invest into a tactical marketing plan. And then, of course, you need to outline the company's SWOT. And what this does is it develops an essential realistic awareness of your company's abilities. That way, it keeps you on track and keeps you in a mindset that you need to attain certain goals. You need to grow. You need to strengthen your company where it's the weakest. You have to grow. You have to develop. You have to progress, and that's what your SWOT is going to do. It's going to bring your awareness to those aspects. Also, to develop the company's required cash flow statement. And really, what this does, you need to know where your money's going when it comes in. So you need to set up a budget plan that goes over and highlights your cash inflow and your cash outflow. That way, you're able to budget your business's finances so that you are sustainable and profitable. Every business should be profitable, because if you're just breaking even, chances are you're not going to be able to buy that brand new fancy BMW that you want. Okay, and then of course the executive summary. Very important to input your executive summary into a business plan. So like I was saying earlier, the About Us page on a website. So I wanted to go over it a little bit. So the About Us page, if you go to a company's About Us page, you should be able to find at least two or most of these aspects to it. So the company's mission and vision statements, a thorough description of the business or the service, the inclusion of the management team's knowledge, skill sets, and abilities to ensure efficient execution of the company goals and responsibilities. And that's important. That is what is going to let your consumers know where you stand in comparison to your competitors. You want to stand out. You want to be the diamond in the sand. You want your consumers to say, wow, this company has the highest level of abilities that I think I can definitely utilize. And then what sets the company apart from the competitors, of course. So your target markets. So here are 4 target markets for digital forensics. So businesses, attorneys. So businesses, they'll hire you to conduct internal investigations or to check their infrastructure and see where their weak points are, and then help them to consult with them to develop a stronger infrastructure to avoid and to mitigate potential cyber crimes. And then, of course, attorneys will hire digital forensics in order to help build a case or help to diminish a case, of course. Law enforcement and private investigators may also use your services to help their investigations. So building a lab. You have to abide by specific lab requirements, which are established by the ANSI National Accreditation Board, ANAB, under the ISO/IEC 17025 and ISO/IEC 17020. And all of this information can be found on their website in the accreditation manual for forensic service providers. So in order for your lab to meet the minimum requirements, you have to abide by what the regulations are set forth by ANAB. And this has to be done before you can even be operational. So definitely look into those. So in building a lab, your lab has to be secure. So you have to have at least minimal security. So when it comes to a small lab, it's not expected for you to have James Bond type technology. But you have to be able to have locked doors. You have to be able to have certain aspects to ensure the security and the integrity of your lab. Of course, maintenance is a big aspect of that. And then, of course, you have to invest and you have to know what workstations and other specific equipment you need to purchase. And especially if you're looking to borrow money from a lender, you have to submit something that has everything that you need to purchase. All of that's going to go into the loan for building your lab. So budget planning. Your budget planning should include the overhead costs, maintenance costs, equipment and tool costs, your marketing costs, unexpected costs, and miscellaneous costs. So your unexpected, that's something that there's always going to be that one thing that happens. You're going to have to get the AC fixed, or there's a roof leak. There's miscellaneous things that you're going to have to invest in, that you have to have money come from somewhere. So here I included what's called the legal framework for digital forensics investigations. And this is a step-by-step, is a 6-step process to the discovery, to the discovery of an incident scene to reporting it. So the first step is the identification and preparation. So you have to recognize the incident. You have to prepare for the incident with the proper tools and techniques. You have to, in order to acquire specific information, specific data, you have to have the correct search warrants and authorizations. Second is the search and seizure, which you need to recognize the evidence and collect the evidence. Third is the preservation of the evidence. Fourth is examination. So you have to duplicate the evidence. You never want to conduct your investigations on the original copy, because you don't want to risk corrupting, damaging, or losing any of that information, any of that evidence. And also recovering the data, of course, from the copied version. And then the analysis is step 5. And under the analysis, you need to determine the significance, reconstruct fragments of data, and you have to draw your conclusions. And then finally, reporting. So here you're going to summarize, translate, and explain your conclusions and how these conclusions will either sway in the direction of the offense or the defense, or whoever it's more favorable of course, depending on whatever the situation may be. So this is something very important to understand. You have to know your legal framework. So conclusion, there are clear signs for a growing market in the cybersecurity sector. And as technology progresses, criminal conduct and methods will as well. In order for companies to ensure they are best protected from potential threats, they must develop an awareness for investing into cybersecurity preventative measures. Too many rules are written in blood spilled and lost gains. And these concerns will never disappear, but will for sure progress. For digital investigators, these are the playing fields that open a bright future for us to protect others, especially in the mobile device market. Mobile phones, along with other mobile devices, are becoming more common among people. This is why there is and will continue to be an exponentially growing market for mobile device forensics. All right, and that's going to conclude everything. I appreciate it all. I hope this was helpful information. And if you want to stick around, you will see my references. Thank you so much.